to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from July 31st, 2020, and I'm recording this on January 29th, 2021. As always, we do this just to try to understand what books are still hot, what books are not, what books we should have been patient on, just so we make better decisions when it comes to those books of the moment that everyone is kind of chasing. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. This week we have 20 different comics between the two lists, so they had no crossovers no books made both lists. So with that many books, let's get right into this and see what we can learn. First up, we got a few books that were kind of related to option-related news, or at least TV shows and that kind of stuff outside of Marvel and DC. First up was Invincible #1. This had everything to do with the animated show that was coming, and just casting news and that kind of stuff. So that's why this hit the list. Back then, a 9.8 hit a record of $1,635, which is what put it on the list. Right now, 9.8s have been setting around $1,500 to $1,600 pretty much this whole time. So this has been pretty steady. Raw copies will run you $400 to $600, depending on conditions. So yeah. So this one's been pretty steady for the last 6 months. The show is coming soon. My guess is this going to jump again when the show actually starts coming out. It's been pretty steady for the last few months. So maybe either be prepared to wait or grab it now. If this is, because I don't think it's going to come back anytime soon on this one. Next we have Beauty #1, the Frozen variant, the Jenny Frozen variant, and this had everything to do with the main cover of this hit the list last week because there was that Netflix was working on a show related to this title. I said 6 months ago when I did the Cash or Trash, when that hit the list, that I'd rather have the Frozen, and that seems to be pretty much the case. Back then, the Frozen variant was going for $45 to $60 compared to like $15, $20 for the main, and now it's still doing $30 to $80 with a 9.8. It's going to cost you $125 to $150. So another book that's been pretty steady over the last 6 months. Gorgeous cover, and yeah, so this one is could be had occasionally for cheaper, but it's been sitting right in that same kind of range. Next, we have one of a couple books that I'm going to talk about that Tom and Key Collector put on their list that sometimes they put books on there I don't think have any business being on a hot book list, but we'll get into that. Next is Green Hornet #1 from the 2010 run, and this hit the list because this is the Kevin Smith run of Green Hornet, and they're supposedly working on an animated show, and he was attached to work on it, so people were thinking, oh, his run will definitely influence the show, so people kind of were grabbing this, but they were only paying $4. There was like a big bump in sales, like a 1,500% increase in sales or something, but it was only going for $4. And now it's not even going for that. There's basically no sales in the last 3 months that I can find on eBay. Now there is a Campbell variant of this book, J. Scott Campbell variant of this book, but it's only bringing like $2 to $5. There has been at least a few sales of it. Yeah, this book just not a lot of interest here. There's no real key here other than it's the start of this run. We'll see what happens with this animated show if it's a hit, but I would guess there's other Green Hornet books that are probably going to be the ones that would be affected by that, but that's just my thoughts on the matter anyway. Next, we have the last of our kind of option news books, and that is Oblivion Song #1, and this is the main cover that we're talking about, not the pink signature, but the regular cover, and this had everything to do with Robert Kirkman continuing to say that yes, there's gonna be option news, yes, this is gonna happen at some point, which he's been saying, he said off and on repeatedly. It caused the main cover to jump up to a $10 book. 9.8s were going for $100. It's back down to a cover price book. 9.8 can be had for literally $20 to $50 here recently. This one is way down. Yeah, the pink signature variant is probably the one you want anyway. And there's really these option things just take time. Even if they're really working on it, it's most likely going to be a couple years before we see anything. So you got plenty of time to get back in to get in on this one. Next, we only have one San Diego Comic-Con cover exclusive that made the list 2 weeks in a row, and that is Sleeping Beauties #1, the Peach Momoko variant. I heard from some people, because I said I hadn't heard anything about the series. A couple people said it's actually a pretty good series, but they're literally the only two people I've ever heard talk about it. But anyway, this one, last week, on first week of release, it was going for $100. It was up to $150 by this point. Now it's a $40 to $50 book, so that is a huge drop off. Still pretty good value. I don't know what the buy-in was on this. My guess is it's probably like 20 to something, like a typical kind of store variant type thing. But this one's definitely been a trap. It's definitely way down from if you chased it at that $150 range. With that, we're going to move into some comic buzz, and we actually have a bunch of books that are hit the list because of comic buzz and not because of shows or anything like that. And we're going to start with a big book, and that is Raphael #1, the first appearance of Casey Jones. This hit the list because it was hitting records across several grades. A 9.4 went for a record of 400, 9.6 went for 650, and 9.8 went for 1600. And when you think about it, these are probably this is a long undervalued book, and what's happened in the last 6 months with this book and almost all the Turtle Keys has proven that out. Right now, 9.4 is going for just under 2,000. A 9.6 is going for around, a recent sale on that was 3,600. 9.8 recently went for 6,000. That is just way up. Yeah, this thing's been setting records constantly over the last 6 months. Raw copies will cost you $100 to $300 in, mid kind of grade. If you really found a high grade, I guess it would cost you more than that. But this one has been, like a lot of Turtle books over the last year, has just been climbing and climbing and climbing. And I don't think we're close to the ceiling just yet. We'll see. Next we have Thor #2. The first cameo of Black Winter, I think, is where this officially, I think there's some debate on this in 5. I think they've settled on this is the cameo and 5 is the first, but I could be wrong on that. Back then, this one was going for $75 to $100, which I thought was crazy. I referred to it as a trap at that point. It's currently going $30 to $60, but that's actually back up. It had dropped lower than that. But Donny Cates recently mentioned that he wasn't done with Black Winter, that he was going to bring him back. So it has kind of climbed back a little bit. So it's gained some of that value back. So it is currently 30 to 60 with the 9.8 going for 100 to 150. So maybe a little more and I'll be back. But there was definitely a time that it was down around $20. And that's kind of almost the exact same pattern for Thor #5, which is the first appearance of Black Winter. Back then it was doing 80 to 100. And now it's a $30 to $60 book. 9.8 to 100 to 150. So both of these books are going for about the same value. Both of them, month and a half, 2 months ago, could have been had for less than what they're going for now. But like I said, he's said he's going to use them again, so they've climbed a little bit back up. Next, we're going with Spider-Gwen #1, the third print. I don't know what to think about these. It's clear the market has decided that there is value in the second, third, fourth, seventh prints. Usually whichever one comes out the lowest of any kind of sort of key. In some cases, more value. I would rather have the first print, but especially if it's less, or would cost me less than a third print. But the market is jumping on these third prints. Back then, this third print was going for $150 plus. Now it's going for 30 to 50. 9.8 can be had for 200 to 300, which is pretty good for a $30 to $50 book. So this one was a bit of a trap at $30 to $50 for a raw book, but it's definitely down. But these third prints have been, second and third prints have been doing pretty good across the board for a lot of characters. So we'll see if this one jumps back up when something actually happens with Gwen in the movies or whatever. But yeah. Next we have Batman #28. This is the second week in a row for this book. This is the first appearance of Harper Row as Bluebird. And this had everything to do with Tinian saying that he was bringing her back. Now, truly, I say it's second week in a row, but really it just jumped lists. It was on one list last week. It was on the other list this week. Still going in that same $15 to $20 range. And when we talked about it, it's down to a $5 to $15 book. It was definitely an I'll Be Back. A 9.8 of this can be had for $50. So not a ton of value here. But, a Batman first appearance. So if you're collecting those, there's one that you could track down for pretty cheap. Next is Captain Marvel number 18. This is the first appearance of L'Oreal, Carol Danvers' sister, her half-sister. And this basically at release was going for $10 to $15. Now it's kind of a $5 to $15 book, so cover price to $15. But yeah, 9.8 of this one can be had for $35 to $50. Really hasn't, they had this initial story with her. She's kind of disappeared for the time being. My guess is there will be more with her in the future. So if you can track it down for that $5 range, it might be a decent little spec. But I don't know if would ever come to the MCU or anything like that. But I thought she was a decent character. I did read that story. Seemed like she maybe has some potential, but if you can get her for 5 to 10, that's not much of an investment, but definitely has cooled from that initial release buzz. Next, we have X-Force number 10, first appearance of the Externals, which this had to do with hit the list because of the X of Swords event, and that they were going to play some sort of role, and this is another one. I'm not sure why Tom and them put it on the list. It was going for $3. There's literally like a million of these things. It was an 1,100% increase in sales, so that's why they put it on the list. It's still a $1 to $3 book. Yeah, there's not much else to say about this. Next, we're going to move into a little more comic buzz, but kind of call this just really specifically FOMO, because this is Batman versus Predator number 1, and this had everything to do with that Marvel had gotten the rights to Predator comics, and they were going to start making them, which meant you probably weren't going to see any more of these Batman versus Predator stories anytime, or any sort of reprints of this anytime in the future. Back then, it caused the A cover to jump to a $15 to $20 book. But somebody bought a set of 1 through 3 for $200, which is just stupid. And that's kind of proven out. Right now, it's a $5 to $20 book. Occasionally, it's still going $15, $20, but mostly it's going $5 to $10 for this number 1. A 9.8 can be had for $80 to $100. And both of the last two sets of issues 1 through 3 have went for around $20. So, yeah, this one has dropped way back. Definitely was not, whoever paid that $200. Now, if you paid the $18 to $20, you didn't really go too crazy buying the A cover, but buying a set for $200 was not a good investment. Next, we have Action Comics 689. This is the first appearance of Superman in the black suit. This hit the list because they dropped an image from the Snyder cut of Superman in the black suit. Hype. I don't get the hype for the Snyder cut. I don't think Snyder's a very good movie maker, but that's just me. I didn't enjoy his other DC movies. I'm not sure why I want to see his Justice League, but hey. Anyway, this hit the list because of that. It jumped up to a $15 book with a 5,500% increase in sales. I said there was a bunch of those X-Force. There's a bunch of these out there. This was all during the death and return of Superman comics. It's a $4 to $5 book. A 9.8, though, for some reason, is going for $100 to $120, and I think that's really just because there's not very many that have been slabbed. But yeah, this was not a book that's worth chasing. There's a billion of these in dollar bins. Go find one. With that, we're going to move into sort of MCU spec. The first is Strange Academy number 1, the 1 in 25 Ramos cover. And this is, of course, there's a ton of first appearances in this, and people are specking that at some point this will be a Disney Plus show, which I can see. I can see why people would expect that with all these first appearances. Back then, this was going for $125. Thought that was a little high. I was wrong. This book is still sitting 80 to 125, or 80 to 150 actually for raw copies. 9.8 will cost you 250 to 300. These Strange Academies have been holding pretty steady for the last several months. All the different A covers have been pretty steady, including this one. So there's definitely some interest in this, and people do think something's going to happen with these characters. Plus, I think it's actually been a pretty good story. I haven't read it, but it's what I've heard. So, good grief, we still got 5 books left. A lot of books this week. The 16th book on our list is Hawkeye #9. This is the first appearance of Clown, which is a potential villain for the Hawkeye show, or that's what people are thinking. This jumped up to a $15 to $40 book. It's also a sweet Kate Bishop cover, which we actually talked about the second print in those terms, but this had to do a few weeks ago, but this had to do with actually suspect that Clown is going to be the villain for the show. A big increase in sales. Still setting 10 to 30, so a little bit lower, but still in the same, covering that same kind of range that it was back then for raw copies. A 9.8 on this, though, is going to cost you all the way up around $2 to $250. I guess that white cover is pretty tough to get in a 9.8. Yeah, so this one's also been pretty steady, really, for in value, and still a pretty cool cover. And this is a fantastic Hawkeye run if you've never read it. I recommend you track it down and read it, if nothing else. Next, we have Marvel Spotlight 12, the first appearance of the Son of Satan, Damian Hellstrom. And this had to do with the trailer dropping at SDCC for the show. Back then, it jumped up to a $60 book, and somebody with a sense of humor paid $666 for a 9.8. And yeah, that show has already been canceled. That show was not a hit on Hulu. So it's still a good book. It's a $20 to $50 book now. There's been no 9.8 sales recently. 9.6 went for around 300. So it's down a little bit, but not crazy down. I think there's like 2 cameos before this one in terms of appearances for this character, but definitely disappointed the show didn't amount to much. I do worry that it might limit Marvel's willingness to take some chances with some other characters on shows. But hopefully they'll just chalk it up as this just wasn't a very good show, and we'll get some other version down the road. 3 more to go, and first up is West Coast Avengers #45, first appearance of the White Vision. And this has everything to do with WandaVision that's going on right now. I really want to talk spoilers at the moment because I am up through episode 4, but I will not. But yeah, back then it was hitting $15. 9.8 was going for $160, and people thought maybe this is the version of Vision that would be coming back. Now it's a $10 to $25 book, so kind of in the same range. 9.8 is going $2 to $250. So this one's been pretty steady as well, even up a little bit for the 9.8. Maybe an undervalued book. It's a nice homage cover to his original first appearance. So yeah, this has been pretty steady. We'll see where things go with this show. But I'm really enjoying it so far. If you haven't checked it out, I would recommend it. Next, we have Young Avengers #1, first Kate Bishop, as well as some other characters, but that's what's driving this is Kate Bishop and her in the oncoming Hawkeye show. Back then, it was a $70 book for raw copies. 9.8 went for $380, and it hit the list because there were casting rumors again that Haley Steinfeld was going to be Kate Bishop, which have been going on for a couple of years, and then she's denied them, Marvel's denied them. Well, it turns out we've seen a trailer now. We know she's cast. She is going to be Kate Bishop. So, yeah. And I said back then, I thought this was straight cast. This book was going to keep climbing as we got closer to the show. Now it's a $100 to $150 book, raw, $400 to $500 and 9.8. And my guess is it'll keep going up, especially if that show turns out to be half as good as WandaVision has been so far. So, and our last book of the week has to do with another Marvel Disney Plus show, and that is all new Marvel Now .1, the first full appearance of Kamala Khan. $50 back then, which actually seems low for when I bought a copy and stuff. I feel like I think that should have been $150, I'll be honest, but that's what Tom said, was it was going for 50. 9.8s were going for $625. Now raw copies are running at 80 to 200 based on condition, and this is a very condition sensitive book. It is hard to get a high grade in this thing. Most of them are pretty beat. There's a lot of spine ticks. It's hard to find one that doesn't have at least a few spine ticks. 9.8s will go for 7 to 750. So this is another one that's continued to trend up. Another character who has a show coming to Disney Plus. So that's this week's list. Some Disney Plus shows at the end that have done really well. Most everything else, a lot of books that have stayed pretty steady this week. Invincible, that Beauty book, or the Sleeping Beauty, the Frozen cover. Sorry, not the. Yeah, so there's been several, including that West Coast Avengers and the Hawkeye. So there were several books that were steady, and then a bunch of books that dropped as usual. I want to thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and we will catch you next time.